The dusty archives of Montgomery, Alabama, whispered tales of a scandal that reverberated through the deep South, forever altering the lives of those ensnared within its web. Amongst the crumbling pages lies a will, dated July 22, 1842, that outlines a bequest so outrageous it defies belief, a fortune promised to a daughter who had never existed. The name Alice Whitmore appears, a phantom heir to the sprawling Whitmore estate, a name that echoes with the chilling implications of betrayal and inheritance. Yet, what the ink cannot convey is the chilling truth that lurked beneath the surface. A story of deceit, hidden identities, and deadly ambition that unfolded against the backdrop of a society bound by tradition and the unyielding grip of class. The Whitmore family did not merely navigate the treacherous waters of Southern aristocracy. They orchestrated a symphony of ruin for anyone who dared to challenge their dominion over wealth and power. Long before Alice Whitmore became a ghost in her own home, the family had perfected the art of manipulation, ensuring that the boundaries of loyalty were blurred and the line between love and greed dangerously thin. To understand the depths of this intrigue, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we delve into the dark recesses of history. Leave us a comment sharing your thoughts or any similar tales from your own state. These stories demand to be unearthed. Montgomery, in 1842, was both a cradle of elegance and a cauldron of conflict, where grand antebellum mansions stood proudly amid the relentless march of social change. The sweet fragrance of magnolia blossoms mingled uneasily with the bitter legacy of slavery, creating a paradox that defined the very fabric of Southern life. Among the illustrious families residing in this city, the Whitmores were distinguished not only by their wealth, but by their notorious reputation for cunning and ruthlessness. Jonathan Whitmore, the patriarch, was a man of imposing stature, his sharp features framed by a mane of gray that spoke to both his years and his wisdom. He was a master of the Southern gentry's art, charming and calculating in equal measure. Beneath his genteel facade lay a mind that could calculate profit and loss with a precision that rivaled the most skilled gambler. He had inherited Oaks Hill, a vast cotton plantation that had flourished through the labor of countless enslaved men and women. Yet his true legacy was etched in the shadows of the family's history. An intricate game of chess played with the lives of those around him. The Whitmore estate, perched atop a hill overlooking the river, boasted sprawling gardens and a facade that belied the secrets hidden within its walls. It was here, in this fortress of wealth, that the saga of Alice Whitmore would begin to unravel, challenging the very notions of kinship and ambition in a world teetering on the brink of upheaval. In the thick, humid air of midsummer, the Whitmore estate buzzed with the anxiety of an impending storm. Dark clouds gathered ominously above the sprawling oaks that lined the driveway, their twisted branches stretching like skeletal fingers toward the sky. Inside the grand parlor, Jonathan Whitmore sat in a leather-bound armchair, the flickering light from the fireplace casting ominous shadows across his furrowed brow. The will, crumpled and fading, lay on the mahogany table before him, a tempest of intrigue and betrayal swirling in his mind. He had summoned his closest confidant, Henry Caldwell, a lawyer with an affinity for the arcane and a knack for navigating the treacherous waters of Montgomery's elite. Henry arrived promptly, his demeanor unusually grave, as if he too felt the weight of the family's secrets pressing down upon them. "Jonathan," Henry began, his voice low and measured. "The implications of this will extend far beyond mere inheritance. Alice Whitmore could be a phantom more dangerous than you realize." He leaned closer, as if the very walls of Oaks Hill had ears. "There are whispers, my friend. Whispers of a hidden heir, a real daughter, born of the shadows." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, the corners of his mouth curling into a sardonic smile. "Hidden, you say? A tragedy for the family name to know of such a misstep." The flaring temper that often resided just beneath his composed exterior threatened to break free. "Tell me, Henry, who dares to speak such heresy?" "The enslaved folk," Henry replied, his voice dropping further. "They have eyes and ears throughout the estate. Rumors of a child born to one of the seamstresses have begun to circulate. A girl who possesses the same olive skin and dark curls that define our lineage. If she exists, Jonathan, she could be the key to unraveling everything." The room fell silent, the weight of revelation settling heavily upon them. Jonathan's mind raced, considering the implications. What would the discovery of such an heir mean for his carefully curated empire? Would the specter of a lost daughter haunt him, or could he manipulate the story to his advantage? Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the halls, breaking the tension like glass shattering on the floor. The butler, a stoic figure named Roderick, stepped in, his expression betraying a hint of urgency. "Sir, a visitor has arrived." "A woman claiming to be searching for her family." Jonathan's heart quickened. The timing was too coincidental, too fortuitous. He exchanged a glance with Henry, both men recognizing the potential for calamity or opportunity. "Show her in," Jonathan commanded, his voice steady despite the storm brewing within. As Roderick retreated, Jonathan's thoughts raced. Who was this woman? Could she be the missing piece of the puzzle, or merely an unwelcome interloper who threatened to unearth the darkest secrets of the Whitmore lineage? Moments later, a figure emerged through the doorway, the dim light illuminating her striking features. She was tall and graceful, with an air of defiance that seemed to challenge the very walls of Oaks Hill. Her hair, dark and wild, framed her face in a halo of rebellion. But it was her eyes, piercing and resolute, that held Jonathan's gaze captive. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice unwavering, "I believe I have a claim to the truth about my family. I come seeking answers." With those words, she stepped further into the room, as if the weight of history itself trailed behind her. Jonathan felt the air shift, the storm outside reflecting the turmoil within. Whatever the outcome, he knew that the arrival of this woman heralded a reckoning, one that would not only challenge his authority, but might also unearth the buried truths of the Whitmore legacy. As thunder rumbled in the distance, a sense of foreboding settled over Oaks Hill. Secrets had a way of clawing their way to the surface, and in the Whitmore household, the past was never truly buried. As dusk settled over Oaks Hill, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the grand facade of the Whitmore estate. The evening air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to murmur through the sprawling gardens and echo off the polished marble floors of the mansion. Jonathan Whitmore stood at the window of his study, his fingers drumming restlessly against the mahogany desk, his mind a tumult of thoughts. "Sir?" Roderick's voice broke through the silence, low and steady, as he entered the room with a tray of whiskey. "You have a visitor," the woman in question. Jonathan turned, his expression inscrutable. She is not to be trusted, Roderick. We cannot afford any loose ends. The butler nodded, his gaze steady, but there was an uncharacteristic flicker of concern in his eyes. She carries the air of someone who knows more than she reveals. Perhaps it is time we confront the truth, sir. Secrets tend to attract scrutiny. With a dismissive wave of his hand, Jonathan took the whiskey and downed it in one swift motion, the burn igniting his senses. Truth does not serve us well, Roderick. It has a way of unraveling the very fabric of our lives. Yet, deep down, the words of the mysterious woman echoed in his mind, a claim of blood ties that could unravel generations of carefully constructed myths. As he turned to face the door, he felt the weight of the past pressing against him, each layer of deceit threatening to come undone. Downstairs, the parlor was dimly lit, the flickering candles casting an eerie glow on the walls adorned with portraits of long-dead Whitmores. The woman sat poised in a corner, her eyes flickering to every shadow, every creak of the old house, as if expecting someone to emerge from the darkness. Her name was Lila, and though she wore a modest dress, there was a fierce determination in her demeanor that belied her humble appearance. "Miss Lila," Jonathan greeted her coolly as he entered, suppressing a shiver that raced down his spine. "To what do we owe the honor of your visit?" "Mr. Whitmore," she replied, her voice steady but edged with urgency. "I come not merely as a seeker of truth, but as a bearer of a legacy that belongs to both of us. The whispers of our shared blood are louder than the silence of your estate." Jonathan's heart raced. "You speak of things you cannot possibly understand." "I understand much more than you think," she countered, her gaze piercing through his defenses. "Your hidden daughter, Alice, was not a figment of your imagination. She was flesh and blood, my mother's sister, and I believe I deserve to know my place in the Whitmore legacy." The room fell silent, the air thickening with unspoken accusations and revelations. Henry, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward, his brow furrowed. "Jonathan, perhaps we should entertain this discussion. If there is any truth to her claims, it may be wiser to confront it rather than conceal it." Jonathan shot a warning glance at Henry before turning back to Lila. "What do you want from me? Money, a title. You should know that these things come with a price." "I seek justice, Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice unwavering, "for my mother and for those who suffered in the shadows of your wealth. I am not here for handouts. I am here to reclaim what was stolen." A flicker of something, fear perhaps, caught in Jonathan's throat. He had always been the master of his domain, but the ground beneath him was shifting, and the very foundations of Oaks Hill felt precarious. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by the frantic footsteps of the staff. Roderick rushed in, his expression grim. "Sir, it appears one of the enslaved workers has escaped the fields. The overseer is raising a ruckus, and there are whispers that he may have information regarding the very matters you wish to keep hidden." Jonathan's face hardened, shadows deepening in the corners of his eyes. Misdirection. "We cannot allow this to spiral further. Lila, you need to leave, now." But Lila stood firm, her eyes blazing. "If you think silencing me will solve your problems, you are gravely mistaken. The truth is like a fire, Mr. Whitmore. It will consume everything in its path." And with that, the stage was set for a reckoning that would challenge not only the Whitmore legacy, but the very essence of the world Jonathan had worked so tirelessly to protect. As Jonathan weighed his next move, the night deepened, and the shadows of Oaks Hill grew longer, each secret threatening to claw its way back into the light. As the last rays of sunlight slipped behind the horizon, Oaks Hill seemed to hold its breath, the shadows deepening like ink pooling on parchment. Lila stood in the grand foyer, her back straight, eyes blazing with a determination that made Jonathan's heart race with unease. The air crackled with tension, each tick of the ornate clock echoing like a drumbeat, signaling the approach of an inevitable confrontation. "Do you really think I would come here without knowing what I was walking into, Jonathan?" Lila's voice cut through the silence, steady, yet laced with an undercurrent of defiance. "I am not here to play games. I am here to claim what is rightfully mine." Jonathan clenched his jaw, his mind racing as he weighed his options. The weight of generations hung heavily on his shoulders, and the thought of Lila's presence threatening to unravel the very fabric of his family's legacy sent a shiver down his spine. "Your claim is built on nothing but stories, Lila. Stories that can be easily dismissed. Can they?" Lila stepped forward, her resolve unyielding. "What about the letters my mother left behind? The ones that speak of a child born from love, a child who was denied her place in this family. You cannot simply deny the truth because it is inconvenient." At that moment, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway, and Henry appeared, his brow furrowed with concern. "Jonathan, I think we need to consider the implications of this situation more carefully. If Lila's claims hold any weight, there are far-reaching consequences we have yet to comprehend." "Consequences," Jonathan snapped, his voice rising. "What consequences could possibly outweigh the chaos she has already brought upon us? This is Oaks Hill, not a playground for lost souls." Lila's expression softened, if only for a moment. "You think your family's secrets are a playground. I've spent my life piecing together the fragments of my mother's past, and all I've found are shadows. I deserve answers. Answers that can only be found here." Jonathan felt a flicker of pity for Lila, but it was quickly extinguished by the need to protect his family's reputation. Just then, a loud crash resonated from the kitchen, drawing all their attention. Jonathan's heart raced as he exchanged a worried glance with Henry. What was that? Before either could respond, a servant burst into the foyer, her face pale with fright. "Mr. Whitmore, there's been an accident in the kitchen. One of the workers has collapsed." Jonathan rushed past Lila and Henry, his mind spiraling as he made his way toward the commotion. The weight of the estate felt heavier than ever, secrets twisting like vines around his thoughts. The kitchen was ablaze with chaos. A group of workers had gathered around a young man lying on the floor, his body limp, the air thick with the scent of smoke and fear. "Get a doctor," Jonathan barked, kneeling beside the young man, whose face was ashen. He recognized him as Samuel, one of the newer workers. His family had been among those who had served the Whitmores for generations. "What happened? He just collapsed, sir," one of the older workers replied, visibly shaken. "He was working with the stove when he just fell." In that moment of crisis, the looming shadows of Oaks Hill deepened, and Jonathan felt the burden of his family's legacy crashing down upon him. As he looked into Samuel's pale face, the realization struck him. The secrets of the Whitmore family were not just confined to hidden heirs and forgotten lineages. They were woven into the very fabric of those who had toiled on their land, the souls who had their own stories and struggles, often eclipsed by the towering legacy of the Whitmores. "Lila," he called, his voice suddenly calmer as he turned to her. "You want answers. Perhaps it's time we all faced the truths of our past, together." The atmosphere shifted, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved histories. Lila met his gaze, her expression a blend of surprise and cautious hope. In that moment, the shadows of Oaks Hill seemed to shift, as though the estate itself was responding to the tumult of emotions swirling within its walls. And for the first time, Jonathan felt the stirrings of something he had long buried, a glimmer of possibility amid the darkness. The wind howled outside the grand estate, rattling the aged windows and casting eerie shadows on the walls, an ominous backdrop to the unraveling drama within. Jonathan paced the dimly lit parlor, his hand instinctively running over the cool wood of the desk as he replayed Lila's accusations in his mind. The flickering candlelight illuminated the portraits of his ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow him, judging his every move. "Do you really think you can just deny what she's claiming?" Henry's voice cut through the silence, echoing off the walls like a ghost's whisper. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a frown creasing his brow. "This isn't just about you anymore, Jonathan. It's about the legacy we leave behind." Jonathan stopped, turning to face his friend with a mix of frustration and desperation. "If I acknowledge her claims, I risk everything. Our family's reputation, our standing in this community. What will people think?" Henry took a step forward, his gaze steady and unwavering. "People will think the truth matters more than reputation. And believe me, Jonathan, the truth is already out there. Lila has allies. Her mother's story resonates with those who suffered in silence. You can't bury this under the weight of tradition." As the words settled, Jonathan's thoughts drifted to a faded photograph tucked away in a drawer, a picture he had kept hidden for years. In it, a young woman with striking features bore an uncanny resemblance to Lila. His heart raced at the realization that perhaps, just perhaps, Lila was not merely a stranger staking a claim, but a piece of the puzzle he had long tried to ignore. Without warning, a loud crash shattered the tension. The sound came from the kitchen, where the worker, a young man named Samuel, had collapsed earlier. Jonathan and Henry rushed toward the commotion, their footsteps echoing against the cold tile floor. As they entered, they found Samuel being attended to by a few other staff members, their faces pale with concern. "What happened?" Jonathan demanded, his tone sharper than intended. "He just fainted, sir." One of the kitchen staff replied, her voice trembling. "He's been working long shifts." The heat from the ovens, the stress of it all. A knot tightened in Jonathan's stomach. The weight of his family's legacy pressed harder than ever. Each day, the workers labored under the burden of a history they could barely comprehend, all for a family that had turned a blind eye to their struggles. He glanced at Henry, who nodded subtly, as if suggesting that this was another sign, another indication that the reckoning was at hand. "Get him some water," Jonathan instructed, his voice softened by concern for the young man's well-being. As they tended to Samuel, he felt a flicker of resolve ignite within him. Perhaps Lila was right. Perhaps confronting the family's past was the only way to truly move forward. Just then, Lila entered the kitchen, her determined expression cutting through the air like a blade. She took in the scene, the worried faces, the commotion, and her eyes locked onto Jonathan. You think ignoring the truth will protect you. It's time you face the reality of who you are and what your family has done. A silence fell over the room, the weight of her words hanging like a dark cloud. Jonathan inhaled deeply, feeling the pressure of impending choices. He could no longer afford to be a silent witness to his family's history. He had to confront it head on. "Then let's talk," he said finally, surprising even himself with the firmness in his voice. "Let's bring Alice into the light, and let's hear the truth about your mother." Lila's eyes widened with surprise, but there was no time for hesitation. The reckoning had begun, and Oaks Hill would never be the same. As Jonathan stood in the grand foyer, the weight of Lila's words hung in the air like the dust motes illuminated by the afternoon sun streaming through the ornate windows. The silence stretched uncomfortably between them, punctuated only by the distant echo of footsteps from the kitchen, where chaos had erupted moments earlier. "Is this how you plan to claim your place?" Jonathan finally spoke, his voice a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "By confronting me in my home, holding my family's past against me." Lila met his gaze, unyielding. "No, Jonathan. I'm not here to take from your family. I'm here to reclaim what belongs to my mother, and by extension, to me. You can't ignore the truth forever." Her voice trembled slightly, a sign of the emotion she barely kept in check. Just then, Henry appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on?" he demanded, glancing between Jonathan and Lila. "I heard a commotion." "Is everything all right?" "Samuel collapsed," Jonathan replied, his attention shifting to the kitchen where the commotion had originated. "He's been overworked. It's all too much." The words dripped with an unintentional admission of guilt, a confession of his complicity in the family's disregard for those who maintained the estate. As if summoned by fate, a few moments later, a group of workers emerged from the kitchen, supporting Samuel between them, his face pale and drawn. Jonathan's heart sank as he recognized the signs of fatigue etched into the young man's features, a reflection of the burdens that weighed heavily on all those who served the Whitmore family. Lila stepped forward, her resolve shifting toward compassion. "We need to help him," she urged, her eyes darting to Jonathan. "He can't be left like this." At that moment, Jonathan felt a flicker of something new, an urge to act, to break the cycle of neglect his family had perpetuated. "You're right," he said, the words tumbling out as if they had been trapped inside him for too long. "Let's take him to the medical room. We can't let him suffer for our sins." Together, the three of them moved swiftly to support Samuel, their earlier tensions dissolving into a shared purpose. As they worked to lift him, Jonathan felt a sudden clarity. Lila's presence was no longer solely a threat to his family's legacy. It was a catalyst for change, an opportunity to redefine what it meant to be a Whitmore. In the medical room, as they laid Samuel on the cot, Lila began to examine the shelves stocked with outdated remedies and dusty bottles. "This place, it's like a museum of neglect," she murmured, her voice heavy with empathy. "How many others have suffered in silence?" Jonathan glanced around, his chest tightening. "I never knew," he confessed, grappling with the reality of the estate's shadowy history. "I thought the workers were happy." I thought we were providing them with a good life." "Happy?" Lila scoffed lightly, her intensity unyielding. "You think they would tell you if they weren't. You've spent your life behind these walls, sheltered from the truth. But now, it's time to see beyond the facade." In that moment, Henry stepped forward, his determination palpable. "Let's not just help Samuel. Let's address this together. If we're going to move forward, we need to confront the truth. Not just about your family, Jonathan, but about the entire community that has been impacted by it." Jonathan nodded slowly, the path before him beginning to illuminate. "You're right," he said, a newfound conviction settling into his bones. "This is just the beginning. We need to change the narrative, for Samuel, for Lila, for everyone." As Samuel began to regain consciousness, the three of them formed a circle of support around him. In the flickering candlelight of the medical room, Jonathan realized they were no longer merely bound by family ties or legacy. They were connected by a shared commitment to truth and justice, woven together by the very secrets that had once threatened to tear them apart. The reckoning was no longer a distant possibility. It was unfolding before them, and with it, a chance for something profoundly transformative. As the candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the grand estate, Jonathan knelt beside Samuel, who lay sprawled on the cold stone floor of the kitchen, breathing heavily. The scent of damp earth mingled with the faint aroma of herbs that lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the labor that went unnoticed in the opulence of the estate above. "Stay with us, Samuel," Jonathan urged, his voice cracking under the weight of concern. Lila crouched beside him, her eyes fierce, yet softened by compassion. "We need to get him some water," she instructed, her tone decisive as she turned to Henry, who had rushed to the door. "Go. Hurry." Henry disappeared into the shadows of the estate, leaving Jonathan and Lila to tend to Samuel. As Jonathan cradled the young man's head in his lap, he caught a glimpse of Lila's steely determination. She wasn't just here to confront him. She was here to ignite a fire within him, to challenge him to act rather than remain complacent. "What do you think Samuel's life has been like?" Lila whispered, her voice low yet firm. How many more like him work tirelessly, their spirits crushed under the weight of neglect? "Your family's legacy isn't just tales of grandeur, Jonathan. It's built on the backs of those who suffer in silence." Jonathan felt a knot tightening in his chest. The truth was undeniable. He had spent too long turning a blind eye to the reality of their estate's operations, too caught up in the luxurious existence it provided him. "I don't know how to change it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila's gaze pierced through him. "You start by acknowledging it. You have the power to lift the veil, to give a voice to those who have been silenced. But you must be willing to confront your own family's history, the dark corners that have been swept away, forgotten." At that moment, Henry returned, a glass of water in hand, his brow furrowed with worry. He knelt beside Samuel and offered him the drink, gently encouraging him to sip. As Samuel's eyes fluttered open, Jonathan felt a surge of responsibility wash over him. The young worker's struggle was a reflection of something bigger, a mirror held up to the excesses and failures of his own lineage. "Samuel," Jonathan said softly, "we're going to make things right. I promise." It was a vow birthed from desperation and hope, yet Jonathan felt the weight of it pressing down on him. Could he truly dismantle the legacy his family had built? With Samuel recovering slowly, Lila stood, her resolve seeming to grow as she looked around the kitchen, now dimly illuminated by the rising sun filtering through the small window. "We should gather everyone who works here," she suggested, her voice steady. "We need to hear their stories. They matter just as much as any family tale you know." "Gather everyone," Jonathan echoed, the enormity of her suggestion sinking in. "But what if they don't want to speak? What if they're afraid?" "Fear thrives in silence," Lila replied, determination etched in her features. "But if they see you standing with them, it could spark change. You don't have to do this alone." Henry nodded in agreement, echoing Lila's sentiment. "Let's not waste any more time. If we're going to redefine your family's legacy, we need to start now." As Jonathan rose to his feet, a flicker of excitement mingled with his trepidation. For the first time, the idea of confronting his family's past felt less like a burden and more like a path toward justice. It was a daunting task, yet, with Lila and Henry by his side, he felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "There's a meeting room on the east wing," Jonathan offered, leading the way with newfound resolve. "Let's gather them there." As they moved through the dimly lit corridors, Jonathan's heart raced. Each step echoed with the weight of history, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. But with Lila's fierce spirit and Henry's steadfast support, perhaps they could illuminate the dark corners of the estate and bring forth the stories that longed to be told. And in that moment, Jonathan felt a shift within himself, a burgeoning courage that whispered of the possibility of redemption. The legacy that had once seemed insurmountable now appeared as a canvas, waiting for the brushstrokes of change. As dusk fell over the Whitmore estate, the golden light filtered through the grand windows, casting long shadows that danced across the polished floors. Inside the kitchen, Lila stood with her hands planted firmly on her hips, her brow furrowed in determination. She glanced at Jonathan, who leaned against the counter, visibly shaken after witnessing Samuel's collapse. A silence hung heavy between them, punctuated only by the distant clatter of dishes and the murmurs of the household staff preparing dinner. "Jonathan," Lila said, her voice steady yet filled with urgency, "we cannot wait any longer. We need to gather the workers tonight. They deserve to be heard." He looked up, the weight of his family's legacy pressing down like a thick fog. What if they don't want to speak? What if they fear repercussions? His voice was a mix of doubt and concern. Henry, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward, his expression resolute. "They fear more for their jobs than they do for their voices. But if you stand with them, you can give them courage. This is about more than just acknowledgement. It's about action." Lila nodded in agreement. "We can create a safe space, a gathering where they can share their stories without fear. We need to show them that change is possible." With a deep breath, Jonathan pushed himself away from the counter, a newfound determination igniting within him. "Then let's do it. We will hold the meeting in the old barn. It's big enough, and it's away from prying eyes." As they made their plans, Samuel lay in the medical room, the sound of his ragged breaths echoing in the silence. A nurse, weary yet compassionate, gently dabbed a cloth to his forehead. "You're going to be all right," she whispered, though her eyes betrayed the deep concern she felt for the young man, a symbol of many others who toiled endlessly for minimal reward. Later that evening, the barn was transformed. Lanterns flickered softly, casting a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the chill of the evening air. Workers trickled in, hesitant at first, but their curiosity drew them closer. Jonathan stood at the front, flanked by Lila and Henry, his heart pounding as he surveyed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "I know many of you might feel uncertain about what this means, but I promise it is a step toward change. We want to hear your stories. We want to listen." A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd as they exchanged glances, weighing their trust against the memory of their struggles. It was Lila who took the first step forward, her voice carrying the weight of countless unspoken grievances. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," she shared, her eyes scanning the crowd. "But together we can change that." As she spoke, one by one, the workers began to share their experiences. A woman recounted the long hours spent in the fields, her hands blistered and sore. A man spoke of a recent accident that had left him unable to work for months, with no support from the estate. Each story wove a tapestry of resilience and anguish that filled the barn with a palpable energy. Jonathan felt the walls of his family's legacy crumble around him, replaced by the raw truths of those who had suffered in silence for too long. Each voice was a call to action, a reminder that change was not merely a word, but a collective effort. As the night wore on, a sense of unity began to blossom among the workers. They found strength in each other's stories, and for Jonathan, it was a moment of reckoning, a chance to confront the past and reshape the future. With the final story shared, Jonathan stepped forward again, his heart racing. "Tonight, we begin a new chapter. I am committed to making changes to improve your working conditions and to honor those who have come before us. We will not rest until justice is served. Together, we will build a legacy that reflects compassion, respect, and dignity." The crowd erupted in a hesitant applause, the sound both unfamiliar and exhilarating. In that moment, hope ignited among them. A shared belief that perhaps they could rewrite the narrative of the Whitmore estate. A narrative that had long been steeped in neglect, but was now poised for transformation. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Jonathan stood at the entrance of the old barn, heart pounding with uncertainty. The cool evening air was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the warmth brewing inside where the workers had gathered. Lila's fierce determination had created a palpable excitement, but Jonathan's mind raced with doubt. Would they receive him as one of their own, or would they see him only as the man whose family had long oppressed them? He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the heavy wooden doors creaking behind him. The barn was dimly lit, filled with the murmurs of anxious voices. Samuel, now seated against a hay bale with a pale face but determined eyes, nodded at Jonathan, a flicker of hope lighting his features. Jonathan felt an unexpected surge of resolve. If Samuel could muster the strength to be here after his collapse, then he could certainly face this gathering. Lila stood beside him, her presence a steady anchor. "You can do this, Jonathan," she whispered, her gaze unwavering. With a nod, he stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steadying as he spoke. "I'm here to listen, to truly hear what you have to say. I know I have not been the leader you needed, but I want to change that." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jonathan could see weary faces, etched with lines of hard labor and worry, One woman, her hands calloused and worn, stepped forward. "We've been silenced for too long," she said, her voice strong despite the tremor of emotion. "The long hours, the low pay. We deserve better, Jonathan. We deserve to be treated as humans, not just tools on your family's estate." Her words hung heavily in the air, and Jonathan felt the weight of her truth. He met her gaze, resolute. "I understand that now. It's time to confront the legacy of neglect that has haunted this estate. We need to work together to create a better future." Another man, older and with a face lined by years of relentless toil, spoke up. "And what does that mean for us? Words are just words until they turn into action." "I promise," Jonathan said, his voice gaining strength, "to meet with each of you, to discuss your needs, to advocate for fair wages, better working conditions, and a voice in how things are run here. This estate can be a place of dignity and respect, but it starts with each of you." The atmosphere shifted as murmurs of hope began to replace skepticism. Lila smiled, her eyes shining with pride. It was then that Jonathan noticed Samuel slowly raising his hand, a slight tremor evident in his movements. I want to help too," he managed to say, his voice still weak but filled with resolve. "We all have stories to tell. We need to share them. Not just for ourselves, but for the ones who come after us." "Yes," someone shouted from the back, and soon others joined in, rallying behind Samuel's call. The barn buzzed with a newfound energy, each worker drawing strength from one another, their collective voices rising in solidarity. Jonathan felt a swell of determination as he listened to their stories unfold. Tales of lost wages, long hours, and the struggle to provide for families. Each narrative stitched together a tapestry of resilience and hope, a legacy that could redefine what it meant to work at the Whitmore estate. As the meeting continued, Jonathan felt the walls of the barn close in around him, not with the weight of oppression but with the promise of change. They were standing on the cusp of a revolution, fueled by unity and the shared vision of a brighter future. In that moment, Jonathan knew they were no longer bound by the past. They were forging a new identity, one that transcended the shackles of his father's legacy. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, a plan began to take shape. They would form a committee comprised of workers from every corner of the estate to advocate for their rights. Jonathan would stand with them, not as their master but as their ally. Together they would rewrite the narrative of the Whitmore estate, transforming it from a symbol of oppression into one of hope and empowerment. As the meeting drew to a close, Jonathan felt lighter, energized by the collective spirit in the room. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, he believed in the power of community and the promise of change. With Lila and Henry by his side, he was ready to face whatever obstacles lay ahead, determined to honor the voices that had once been silenced. As the last echoes of the meeting faded into the creaking timbers of the barn, a palpable energy lingered in the air. The dim lanterns flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the workers who sat in a tight circle, their expressions a blend of hope and apprehension. Jonathan stood at the forefront, his heart racing, buoyed by the newfound camaraderie that had blossomed amidst the dust and silence of the Whitmore estate. "Tomorrow," he began, his voice steady, "we take the first step. We will present our concerns to the estate's management. They must hear our voices, and we must stand together as one. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, and Lila nodded vigorously, her eyes shining with determination. "Let us not forget the stories we shared tonight," she added, her tone passionate. "Each of us carries a piece of this legacy, and together we can rewrite it. Our histories are not just tales of hardship, they are also stories of resilience and strength." Just then, Samuel, still wearing the pallor of recent illness but visibly invigorated by the gathering, raised his hand. "What if they refuse to listen?" he asked, the doubt in his voice tempered by an undercurrent of hope. "What if they choose to ignore our plight?" Jonathan met Samuel's gaze, a deep understanding passing between them. "Then we will make them listen," he replied firmly. "We will gather more support, workers from nearby farms, allies from the town. Our movement will not be silenced." As the meeting dissolved into discussions of strategy, a sudden gust of wind rattled the barn's wooden doors, and a figure appeared in the doorway. An elderly man with a weathered face and a cane, his presence commanding yet gentle. It was Mr. Thompson, the former estate overseer, who had long retired but retained a wealth of knowledge about the estate's inner workings. "I couldn't help but overhear," Mr. Thompson said, his voice gravelly but warm. "You've got spirit, young Jonathan, but if you aim to challenge the Whitmore legacy, you'll need to arm yourselves with knowledge. Come, let me share what I know." Intrigued, the group gathered closer as Mr. Thompson recounted tales of past disputes between the estate's management and the workers. He spoke of a hidden clause in the estate's founding charter that outlined the rights of the workers, a relic of a time when the voices of labor held more weight. The barn fell silent, each worker hanging on his every word. "The management has tried to bury this for decades, but it can be unearthed," he said, his eyes glinting with the thrill of rebellion. "If you can prove that they've ignored their own agreements, you will have a solid ground to stand on. You can demand justice not just for yourselves, but for generations of workers who have come before you." Eager to harness this newfound knowledge, Jonathan felt a spark ignite within him. "We will find that clause," he declared, a fire igniting in his belly. "We will bring it to light, and we will not back down until every worker receives the dignity and respect they deserve." The workers exchanged glances, a sense of urgency and purpose swelling among them. With newfound determination, they began to formulate a plan. They would scour the estate's records, delve into dusty archives, and seek allies who could lend their expertise. Each individual would play a role, for this was not just Jonathan's fight, nor Lila's alone. It was a collective battle against an unseen giant. As the meeting came to a close, the workers departed one by one, their hearts lighter and their spirits buoyed. The barn, once a sanctuary for whispered grievances, had transformed into a crucible for change, a beacon of hope on the horizon of an oppressive legacy. Outside, the moon shone brightly, illuminating the path ahead. Jonathan lingered for a moment, watching as Leela and Samuel shared a quiet conversation. He felt a swell of pride mixed with an undeniable sense of responsibility. This was just the beginning. The winds of change were gathering, and he was ready to harness them. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the night air, a promise to himself and the workers. "Tomorrow, we rise." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the barn's weathered walls in hues of gold and crimson, an air of anticipation filled the space. Jonathan stood at the front, flanked by Lila and Samuel, as the workers gathered closer, their faces illuminated by the flickering lantern light. Each heartbeat seemed to echo the collective resolve that had taken root in their hearts. "Tonight," Jonathan began, his voice steady yet fervent, "we stand not just for ourselves, but for generations who have endured the weight of silence. We will not let fear stifle our voices any longer." The murmurs of agreement rippled through the group, strengthening his conviction. Lila stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We must share our stories," she urged. "Each of us carries the burden of this estate's legacy, but together, our voices can shatter its hold on us." She gestured toward Samuel, whose spirit had visibly brightened in the last days. "Samuel's journey is a testament to our strength. Let him share his story, so we may all find courage in our struggles." Samuel took a deep breath, the weight of his words suspended in the air. "I was told I wouldn't recover," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor of vulnerability. "But it's not just about my illness. It's about the work we do and the lives we live. I spent too long believing I had no power over my fate. But here, in this barn, I see the truth. We have the power to change our destiny." With each story shared, the atmosphere thickened with a sense of urgency. Workers recounted moments of hardship, of being pushed beyond their limits, but also of small victories, lending a hand to a neighbor, or standing up against an unfair demand. These narratives wove a tapestry of shared experience, drawing them closer together. As the discussions deepened, Mr. Thompson leaned against a wooden post, observing the transformation unfolding before him. "I have seen movements rise and fall," he said quietly, catching Jonathan's eye. "But your unity is something I haven't witnessed in years. You remind me of a time when workers demanded respect and were not afraid to fight for it. You have the charter. Now, you need the courage to confront those who would silence you." With newfound determination, Jonathan proposed a plan that sent ripples of excitement through the group. "Let us gather evidence of our struggles, records of long hours, wages unpaid, and the conditions we endure. We will document our stories and present them to the estate's management. We will not be dismissed. We will demand our rights." The workers nodded, their spirits reigniting. Lila suggested forming committees to oversee different aspects of their campaign. "We need to spread the word beyond these walls," she insisted. "Let's involve the families, the community. Everyone deserves to know the truth." As the night wore on, the barn buzzed with strategizing and laughter, the fears of the past slowly dissolving into a shared vision of future freedom. They were no longer just workers. They were a movement, a force that could no longer be ignored. But as the excitement swelled, dark clouds loomed on the horizon. Unbeknownst to them, the management had caught wind of their gathering. Shadows lurked around the estate, and whispers of retribution began to swirl among those loyal to the old ways. The path toward change was fraught with danger, but Jonathan and his allies steeled themselves, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they sealed their plans with a collective promise to stand together, the barn thrummed with the pulse of hope. Outside, the night grew still, a paradox to the storm brewing within the estate, a storm that would soon challenge the very foundations of the Whitmore legacy. As the flickering light from the oil lamps danced across the barn's wooden beams, casting long shadows on the weary faces of the workers, a renewed sense of purpose filled the air. Jonathan stood at the front, his voice steady, but the tremor of excitement was evident as he addressed the gathering. "We have the power to change our future," he declared, a fervor igniting in the hearts of those present. "But we must act swiftly. The management is not blind to our efforts. They see the cracks in their facade. We need to solidify our plans and present a united front." Lila, her eyes shining with determination, stepped forward. "What if we document our experiences? Each of us has a story to tell. Every late shift, every unjust reprimand. If we compile our personal testimonies, we can create a powerful narrative that cannot be ignored." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and Samuel, who had been listening intently, raised a weary hand. "I have some contacts in the nearby towns, people who have faced similar struggles. Perhaps we can invite them to share their experiences and join our cause. The more voices we have, the louder we will be." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully, his mind racing with new possibilities. "Yes, we can organize a gathering, perhaps right here in the barn. We can invite them next week. We need to showcase not just our stories, but also our solidarity. If we unite with others, we can amplify our message." As discussions intensified, Mr. Thompson leaned against a wooden post, a contemplative look on his weathered face. "I have something more to share," he said, capturing the room's attention. "Beyond the hidden clause in the charter, there are historical precedents. Other estates have faced challenges from their workers and were forced to negotiate. We can look to those cases for inspiration and strategy." Excitement buzzed in the air, and the group began to split into smaller clusters, brainstorming ideas and organizing their thoughts. In a corner of the barn, Lila and Samuel huddled over a stack of old notebooks, scribbling down anecdotes and strategies. Meanwhile, Jonathan moved to a nearby window, peering into the night, contemplating the risks ahead. Suddenly, the creaking of the barn door interrupted their fervor. The workers turned to see a figure silhouetted against the moonlight. It was Clara, a quiet worker known for her keen observations, who had been absent from previous meetings. "I heard you all talking," she said softly, stepping into the barn. "I wanted to come and share something important." The room grew silent as Clara continued. "I overheard some of the management discussing our gatherings. They're preparing to undermine us, perhaps even to threaten those they suspect of being leaders among us." A chill swept through the group, but Jonathan's resolve remained unshaken. "We can't let fear dictate our actions. If anything, this should reinforce our commitment. We need to be prepared for their tactics." Thus, the meeting took on a new urgency. Plans were laid out to establish a communication network among the workers, ensuring that everyone would be informed of any developments or threats. The sense of impending conflict brought a deeper bond among them, a shared understanding that their plight was not just about individual struggles, but a collective fight for dignity and respect. As the night wore on, they resolved to meet again in 2 days, ready to refine their strategies and bolster their numbers. United by a common goal, they left the barn, hearts heavy yet hopeful, stepping into the cool night air, where the stars above twinkled like the glimmers of change they sought to ignite. As the lanterns flickered gently in the stillness of the barn, casting dancing shadows on the walls, Jonathan stood at the center, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. His fellow workers had gathered, their faces illuminated by the warm glow, their eyes reflecting a shared resolve. Tonight, they would forge a new path. "Let's not forget why we're here," Jonathan began, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that loomed outside. "We're here to reclaim our voices, our dignity, and our future. Each of you carries a story that deserves to be heard. Together, those stories can become our strength." Lila stepped forward, her passion igniting the room. "Every hardship we've faced, every moment of struggle, it all matters. When we share our experiences, we weave a tapestry of resilience. It's time we show the world our truth." The workers nodded, motivated by her fervor. As the group began to share their stories, Samuel stood silently at the back, reflecting on his own journey. Memories of long hours under the watchful gaze of management flooded his mind. But with each voice that rose, he felt a spark of hope. He knew that his past was not just his own. It belonged to the collective, and it was time to channel that energy into action. "Listen," Clara's voice pierced through the gathering, drawing all eyes to her. "I've overheard some unsettling news. Management has scheduled a meeting tomorrow with our foreman to discuss new strategies for handling discontent." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them palpable. A murmur of anxiety rippled through the crowd. "What does that mean for us?" someone asked, the fear evident in their tone. Mr. Thompson, leaning against a post, interjected with calm authority. "It means they are aware of your unity. They will try to divide and conquer. But remember, history is on your side. Workers have risen before. They have fought back and won." Jonathan seized the moment, addressing the crowd once more. "We cannot let fear dictate our actions. We need a plan. Clara, can you gather more information? We must be prepared for anything they throw our way. And Lila, let's start organizing those stories. We'll create a pamphlet, a manifesto if we have to. Everyone's voice must be included." The workers rallied, each of them feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They divided into small groups, brainstorming ideas, sharing experiences, and gathering materials. Lila organized a corner of the barn where her fellow workers could write their stories, while Samuel volunteered to help Clara scout for more insights into management's impending moves. As they worked, laughter and camaraderie filled the air, a stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere they had endured. It was a moment of solidarity, a breath of fresh air that ignited their spirit. The barn became a sanctuary, a place where fear was replaced with determination. But as the night wore on, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He knew the stakes were high, and the management wouldn't back down easily. The meetings, the pamphlets, they were just the beginning. Tomorrow would be a pivotal day, and he needed to ensure that they were ready to stand strong, no matter the outcome. Just as the last lantern flickered, casting one final glow, Jonathan gathered the group. "Tomorrow, we meet again to discuss our next steps. But for tonight, let's remember, we are not alone. We are a community, and together, we are powerful." With that, the workers departed, their hearts a little lighter, their spirits a little higher, each of them carrying the weight of their stories and the promise of change into the night. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the cracks in the barn's wooden beams, Jonathan stood at the forefront, his voice steady yet charged with urgency. "We must act swiftly. With Clara's knowledge of management's awareness, we cannot afford to be complacent. This is not just about us anymore. It's about the future we are fighting for." Lila nodded, her brow furrowed with determination. If we document our experiences, we can not only share our plight, but also inspire others who feel trapped in silence. Each story has power, and together they create a force that cannot be ignored. Mr. Thompson, leaning against a post, interjected with his trademark wisdom. In my years on this estate, I've seen countless movements fail because they lacked a clear message. It's vital that our documentation isn't just emotional. It must be strategic. We need facts, figures, and a vivid portrayal of our conditions. Exactly, Samuel chimed in, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. Perhaps we could create an anthology, a collection of our narratives alongside evidence of the injustices we face. We could even print flyers to distribute in nearby towns, rallying support from those who've faced similar struggles. We're not alone. We just need to find our voice. Clara, who had been quietly observing, felt a surge of courage. I overheard management discussing plans for an assembly next week. They aim to reassure the workers that everything is fine, that there's no need for concern. We need to turn this into an opportunity. If we show up as a united front, perhaps we can disrupt their narrative. The air in the barn thickened with excitement and resolve. Jonathan paced, his mind racing with possibilities. What if we organized our own gathering on the day of their assembly? We could invite the community, share our stories, and create a stark contrast to their empty promises. It would demonstrate that we are uniting as one voice. Lila's eyes sparkled with inspiration. Yes, we can use the barn as a central hub, make it a place where our stories are told and echoed. We can create banners, invite local speakers who have fought back against injustices, and even set up a table for those who want to contribute their own experiences. Mr. Thompson smiled, a rare glimmer of hope in his eyes. We must prepare a list of demands to present at their meeting as well. If they're going to meet us with words of assurance, we will meet them with a clear vision of what we want and what we deserve. As the group began to brainstorm ideas for their gathering, Clara felt a surge of confidence. She had always been the quiet one, but now she could see the impact of her knowledge and the strength of their unity. I can help spread the word. I know people in the surrounding farms who would be eager to join us. They have stories to tell, too. With each idea that emerged, the atmosphere in the barn grew electric, as if the very walls vibrated with their collective determination. They worked late into the night, mapping out a plan that would not only elevate their voices, but also resonate far beyond the confines of their barn, carrying the echoes of their struggle into the hearts of those who would listen. As the moon cast a silvery light over the Whitmore estate, the workers left the barn with a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just a group of individuals, they were a movement, a chorus of change ready to challenge the status quo and claim their dignity. And with every step they took toward the horizon, they carried the weight of their stories, preparing to share them with the world. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden light through the barn's wooden slats, the atmosphere buzzed with renewed energy. Jonathan stood at the front, his voice steady as he addressed the assembled workers. We can't just sit back and wait for change to come. We must provoke it, ignite it within ourselves and our community. Lila stepped forward, her eyes shimmering with conviction. Each of our stories is a thread in this tapestry of resistance. It's time for us to weave them together. We can create a narrative that captures not only our struggles, but also our hopes for a future where our voices are heard. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group as Samuel nodded thoughtfully. We should consider every angle. What if we not only shared our stories, but also gathered testimonies from those outside of our immediate circle? The more voices we include, the louder our message will be. Clara, who had been quietly observing, chimed in. That's a brilliant idea, Samuel. We could reach out to other farms and workers in the area. If we can show that this is not just about us, but about a larger system of exploitation, we'll gain traction. Mr. Thompson, leaning against a support beam, interjected with a knowing smile. And let's not forget the power of visuals. A simple pamphlet can be made striking with images. We can include photos from our daily lives, images that illustrate the disparity between our hard work and the profit margins of the management. Excitement filled the room as the workers began brainstorming ideas for their pamphlet. Lila suggested they host a photo day, where each worker could contribute images that encapsulated their experiences. We need to show the world who we are, not just numbers on a ledger, she said passionately. Just then, a loud knock echoed through the barn door, startling the group. Clara immediately peeked out, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern. It's one of the farm's security guards, she whispered, her voice tight. We need to act as if nothing's wrong. Jonathan nodded, signaling for everyone to maintain their composure. With a deep breath, he turned to face the guard as he entered, his demeanor shifting to one of casual friendliness. Evening, just wrapping up a meeting here, he said, trying to project an air of normalcy. The guard, a burly man named Frank, crossed his arms. You lot have been gathering a lot lately. Just making sure everything's above board. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the anxious faces of the workers. Of course, Frank. We're just having a bit of a team-building session. You know how it is, Jonathan replied, keeping his tone light. Frank grunted, but seemed to soften slightly. Just keep it down, all right? The boss is getting nervous about all the chatter. He doesn't like the idea of unrest. As the guard turned to leave, Lila breathed a sigh of relief, her hands shaking slightly. That was close. We need to be more careful. They're watching us. Mr. Thompson's voice broke through the tension. Then we must move quickly. Our stories need to be shared before they can clamp down on us. Let's finalize our plans for this photo day and begin reaching out to those other workers. With a renewed sense of urgency, the group rallied together, voices rising in a chorus of determination. They began organizing logistics for the photo day, mapping out contacts in neighboring farms, and discussing the best ways to reach the community. As the night deepened outside, the barn transformed into a haven of creativity and resilience, each worker embodying a piece of the greater whole. They weren't just fighting for their rights, they were forging a future where every voice mattered, and every story contributed to the powerful narrative of their struggle. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn's wooden beams, a sense of urgency filled the air. The workers gathered closer, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single lantern that swung gently in the breeze. Jonathan stood at the front, his enthusiasm contagious as he detailed the next steps for their planned photo day. We need to capture the truth, he declared passionately, his voice rising above the soft rustling of hay. These images will tell our stories, showcase our labor, and reveal the heart of this place, the sweat, the tears, and the pride we carry with us every day. Lila nodded vigorously, her eyes gleaming with fervor. And we must ensure that these stories reach beyond our immediate circle. Each photograph should be accompanied by a caption, a piece of our narrative. When people see our faces, they'll understand the strength we possess and the injustices we face. Clara, emboldened by her newfound confidence, raised her hand. What if we also include quotes from each worker? Words that reflect not just our struggles, but our dreams for a better future. A collective vision for what we want this place to become. She glanced at Jonathan, her heart pounding with the weight of her suggestion. "Brilliant idea, Clara," Jonathan beamed. "We'll create a booklet that combines images and words, something tangible that we can distribute widely. It'll be our voice, a testament to our collective experience." Mr. Thompson, leaning against a wooden post with a thoughtful look, chimed in. "And let's not forget the importance of strategy. We'll need to choose the right time to distribute this booklet. Timing can make all the difference. We want to ensure it gets into the hands of those who can effect change." As the workers nodded in agreement, the atmosphere shifted slightly, a reminder of the looming threat represented by Frank. The security guard had become a silent shadow in their journey, a reminder of the risks they faced. Just then, the barn door creaked open, and in walked Samuel, a few moments late but brimming with excitement. "Sorry I'm late. You won't believe what I found," he exclaimed, breathless. "I overheard Frank talking to some of the other guards. They're starting to get worried about our gathering. They think we're planning something big." His eyes sparkled with mischief. "Big indeed," Jonathan replied, a determined grin spreading across his face. "But let's use their fear to our advantage. If they're worried, it means we're making enough noise to be heard. We need to amplify what we're doing. Let's invite workers from neighboring farms to our assembly. The more voices, the louder our message." Lila's excitement bubbled over as she suggested. "And we can create a social media campaign. We can share our photos and stories online, reaching even more people beyond our local community. If we can get others to join us, it will strengthen our cause." As they brainstormed ideas, Clara's mind raced. What if we host a storytelling night? A chance for everyone to share not only their struggles, but also the triumphs we've had. We can invite allies, friends, anyone who supports us. It'll be a celebration of our community. The group erupted in a chorus of agreement, their spirits lifting with each passing moment. As they laid out plans for the storytelling night, the sound of laughter and camaraderie filled the barn, the tension momentarily dissipating. But the reality of their situation loomed ever closer. As they gathered their notes and ideas, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of something monumental. They were not just workers anymore. They were a collective force, ready to reclaim their dignity and advocate for their rights. "Let's meet again tomorrow," Jonathan concluded, his voice steady. "We'll finalize plans for the photo day, the booklet, and the storytelling night. Together, we'll show them who we really are." With renewed determination, the workers left the barn, each step echoing a promise to themselves and to one another, a promise of change, resilience, and unity in the face of uncertainty. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the barn's wooden slats, the atmosphere buzzed with renewed energy. Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. "What if we hold a community event right here?" he suggested, gesturing to the wide space around them. "We could invite families from neighboring farms, local activists, anyone who would stand with us." Lila's face lit up. "Yes, a gathering where we can share our stories, not just through pamphlets, but live. We could have an open mic, and people could express their experiences directly. It would humanize our struggle." Samuel nodded thoughtfully, tapping his fingers against the rough wooden table. "And we could set up a photo booth where attendees can take pictures holding signs of solidarity. We could use those images for our campaign." Mr. Thompson, who had been silently considering their plans, finally spoke up. "Visuals can indeed be powerful, but we must also think about how we can document the event for wider outreach," he said, his voice carrying a hint of urgency. "A video could capture the emotions in a way that still images often fail to do." Clara, inspired by the discussion, suggested, "What if we invite a local journalist? They could cover the event, and their article would reach a larger audience. We need to create a buzz." Just as they began to flesh out their ideas, the barn door creaked open, and in walked Elena, a spirited organizer from a nearby town, known for her fierce advocacy for workers' rights. "I heard you all were planning something big," she said, her presence radiating confidence. "I want in. I can help connect you with more resources and even provide some materials for your event." The group exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and relief washing over them. Elena had a reputation for rallying people and drawing attention to causes that mattered. Her involvement could be a game changer. "Let's make this happen," Jonathan said, his voice rising above the chatter. "We'll set a date and start spreading the word. This can be the moment we turn the tide." But just as their spirits soared, the sound of a heavy boot thudding against the barn floor interrupted their excitement. Frank, the security guard, stood at the entrance, arms crossed, his expression one of skepticism. "You all are making quite a lot of noise," he remarked, his tone flat. "Do you really think you can pull this off without repercussions?" Lila stepped forward, emboldened by the camaraderie in the room. "We're not afraid of repercussions, Frank. We're fighting for our rights, for our dignity, and we won't back down." The tension in the air thickened as Frank's gaze hardened. But before he could respond, Clara interjected, "What if you join us? You could see firsthand what we're all about. It's about time someone like you heard our stories." For a moment, the barn fell silent, the workers holding their breath as they awaited Frank's reaction. The challenge hung between them like a charged wire, crackling with the possibility of change. Would he remain an obstacle, or could he be persuaded to see the humanity in their fight? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the barn into twilight, the workers felt the weight of their mission settle around them. A mission not just for themselves, but for every individual who had faced the same struggles in silence. Their resolve strengthened as they prepared to welcome an uncertain future filled with potential, ready to rise together against the odds. As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting warm golden rays through the barn's open doors, the atmosphere crackled with renewed energy. Jonathan stood at the makeshift podium, an old wooden crate, his eyes sparkling with fervor. "All right, everyone. We need to finalize our plans for the big day. Clara, can you lead us in discussing the storytelling night?" Clara nodded enthusiastically, her confidence infectious. Absolutely. I've been thinking about how we can set the stage to really resonate with the community. Perhaps we could invite local musicians to play during the event. It would create a welcoming atmosphere and draw more folks in. Her suggestion sparked a wave of murmurs around the barn, vibrant ideas bouncing back and forth like a lively game of catch. Lila leaned in, her passion igniting the conversation further. And what if we share not just our successes, but our fears, too? It's important for people to know the full scope of our journey. Vulnerability can be a powerful tool for connection. Mr. Thompson, who had been quietly observing, interjected thoughtfully, "That's true, Lila. But we also need to ensure we highlight the positive changes we're fighting for. It's crucial to offer a vision for the future, not just recount the past." Meanwhile, Samuel, leaning against a post, couldn't resist adding a bit of mischief to the mix. What if we give Frank a front row seat? Invite him to share his thoughts. Let's see if that softens his stance. The group erupted in laughter, but Jonathan quickly turned serious. "Actually, that's not a bad idea, Samuel. If we can get him to see our humanity, maybe he'll reconsider his opposition." Elena, who had been quietly taking notes, raised her hand. "We could also create an open invitation for him to participate in our photo day. Maybe he can help take pictures. It would show the community we're not just fighting against him, we're trying to build bridges." The notion of collaboration piqued interest, and Clara suggested, "If Frank sees himself as part of our story, it might soften his heart. After all, many of us have faced rejection and misunderstanding before. Perhaps we can extend that empathy to him." As they continued brainstorming, the door creaked open. Frank stood there, silhouetted against the fading light, arms crossed tightly over his chest. "I heard you all talking. You think you can just swing me over to your side with a few nice words?" His tone was half defensive, half curious. Jonathan took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Frank, we understand your concerns, but we believe there's a way to involve you in our efforts. We'd like to invite you to our storytelling night to share your perspective and hear ours. It's not about changing your mind, it's about understanding each other." Frank appeared taken aback, uncertainty flickering across his face. "You really think that would work?" "I'm just doing my job here," he replied, a hint of vulnerability creeping into his voice. "Exactly," Lila chimed in gently, "and we're just trying to do ours. We're all part of this community. What better way to bridge the gap than to sit down together?" The tension in the barn seemed to shift as Frank considered their words. The warmth of the gathered workers contrasted with his cool demeanor, creating an unexpected moment of connection. "All right," he finally said, his voice softer. "I'll think about it." As he stepped back into the fading light, the workers erupted into excited chatter. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, a sense that perhaps change was not just a distant dream, but a tangible possibility. Jonathan gathered the group's attention once more. "Let's make this storytelling night a night to remember. One where we not only share our stories, but also create new ones together." With a chorus of agreements and an atmosphere rich with hope, the workers set to work, each contributing their unique talents and ideas. The spirit of unity surged within the barn, illuminating the path ahead as they prepared to step into the light, ready to share their stories with the world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue across the barn, the atmosphere inside buzzed with renewed energy. Jonathan stood at the front, his eyes sparkling with determination. All right, everyone. It's time to solidify our storytelling themes. Let's focus on the moments that not only highlight our struggles but also celebrate our triumphs. Lila raised her hand, her enthusiasm bubbling over. I think we should include personal anecdotes that illustrate our journeys. Stories about the times when we overcame obstacles can inspire others. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on Frank, who leaned against the wall, arms crossed but visibly intrigued. You know, Frank interjected, a hint of mischief in his voice, I might have a story or two myself. Even security guards have their battles. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him, their collective curiosity palpable. Clara, ever the organizer, seized the moment. That's the spirit, Frank. You're one of us now. Your story could resonate with so many. She stepped closer, inviting him into their circle. Remember, vulnerability is strength. Sharing our truths creates connections. Elena chimed in, her voice warm and encouraging, and we can help you craft that message. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be real. The group nodded vigorously, echoing her sentiment and fostering a safe space for Frank to let down his guard. With a sheepish smile, Frank shifted his weight, contemplating the idea. All right, maybe I'll give it a shot. But I'm not promising anything too deep, just a couple of funny mishaps from my years on the job. As laughter erupted in the barn, Jonathan seized the opportunity to steer the conversation back to their event. Speaking of funny mishaps, has anyone thought about incorporating some humor into our program? A light-hearted skit could balance the heavier stories and remind us that joy is also part of our narrative. Samuel, who had been quietly observing, perked up. We could have a sketch about a day in the life of a security guard. Maybe even a parody of Frank's greatest hits on the job. It'd be perfect to lighten the mood. The idea took flight, and soon the barn was filled with animated discussions and laughter as the team brainstormed ideas for skits that highlighted their experiences with a humorous twist. Frank's initial skepticism began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. As the meeting wore on, the team divided into smaller groups to refine their stories and sketches. Lila and Clara huddled with Frank, guiding him through the storytelling process, while Jonathan, Samuel, and Elena collaborated on the logistics of the event, ensuring every detail was in place to create an inviting atmosphere. Later, as they took a break, Jonathan stepped outside for a moment of fresh air. The cool breeze brushed against his skin, and he gazed at the stars beginning to twinkle in the deepening twilight. He couldn't shake the feeling that something transformative was on the horizon, not just for their community but for each individual involved. Suddenly, the sound of laughter erupted from the barn, pulling Jonathan back inside. He smiled, realizing that they weren't just planning an event. They were building a movement, one that embraced vulnerability, humor, and authenticity. With each story and shared experience, they would weave a tapestry of resilience that could inspire change beyond the walls of the barn. As the night drew on, the workers continued to bond over their stories, feeling the weight of their struggles lighten with every shared laugh and tear. United by their mission, they would not only advocate for their rights, but also celebrate their humanity, creating a powerful narrative that would echo far beyond their small town.